Welcome to the desert of the real, and welcome to Aeon Byte. Welcome to a very special show of Aeon Byte. My name is Miguel Connor, and I am your pompatus of Gnosis. Good to see everybody on this March 13th, and I'll explain why this date is important beyond the fact that you should, yes, beware the Ides of March, because they are coming. But yeah, good to see everybody. I hope everybody is doing well on this special live stream. And it is always a pleasure and an honor to be joined by Tobias Churton. And he will be discussing his new book, which I really enjoyed, The Book of Enoch Revealed, The Wicked Watchers, Metatron, and the Fruits of Forbidden Knowledge. This is the book you need. This is the latest and greatest. It's got all the latest scholarship, hypotheses on this fascinating body of literature, all the different ways that it has manifested throughout history, and the occult, and also the Abrahamic religions. And we will certainly cover that today. But Tobias, thank you very much, as always, for coming on Aeon Byte.
Delighted to be here, as ever.
Good to see you. And with us, it's always good to see Mr. Graham Pong, one of my favorite fallen angels. How you doing, Graham?
Oh, pretty good, Miguel. I'm not so scared of the Ides of March. It's the March of Ideas that are frightening.
There's so much lack of wisdom. That's it.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to Tobias helping me. I'm looking forward to Tobias helping me solve one of the mysteries that still puzzles me: is whatever happened to the daughters of God? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. They're on social media causing trouble. Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, as I said, this is a special show. It is being streamed only to subs. Again, trying to rile up some interested and also trying to reward those who support Aeon Byte. And I said March 13th because for those subs on Patreon and other on AB Prime, you're getting this show the day of. For everyone else, you will get it late. And there's a possibility with some shows you'll only get partial without the bonuses and all that. So doing this so we can raise a little bit more support for Aeon Byte. Some shows will be behind a paywall, some won't. But yeah, just trying to go with the flow of this Age of Hermes. And because it's a special show for subs, you don't need any super chat. Graham will do his best to get to your questions. It will be a small, intimate crowd as the stream goes on. And so, yes, please support Aeon Byte in any way you can or in any version you see. You know the drill. Like, subscribe, and tell all your Nephilim friends about this heresy. So that's all I got really right now for housekeeping. Great shows coming next week. We will have shows on the tarot. We will have shows. Saul Luckman will be joining us. Shows on Gnostic priesthood, female priesthood. And then later on, the great Mitch Horowitz will be joining us for his new book in about a week or so. So good content coming up. And again, please support. So let's get down to business. Let's get down to the book of Enoch. Again, really enjoyed reading it. So, Tobias, why did you decide to write this book?
It has been in my mind for quite a few years since I first encountered it, almost by accident. The first Enoch 1, or 1 Enoch, first Enoch, the first book of Enoch as it's called, because there are 3 books of Enoch written at different times and very much different times. And the first book of Enoch is a collection of other books put together that later gets known as First Enoch, just establish that to save confusion later, perhaps.
Yeah.
I got into it in the early 90s. I was actually in a bookshop in Oxford looking for books on alchemy, and there I saw the R.H. Charles, the classic translation, English translation, late 19th century translation, revised in about 1907, and I read it with great astonishment. I was aware of the book as a pseudepigraphical Jewish work that had been partially Christianized, was how I think we studied it when I was a student. And the more I read of it, the more relevant it became to the work I was doing on Gnosticism at the time. And I responded to it hugely. So it's crept in and out of various books since. And of course, a few years ago, I did a book called The Lost Pillars of Enoch.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think you and I did speak about that one.
Yes.
But I always wanted to do the total work and make available to the intelligent layperson the best that scholarship has come up with on this subject, right from the first time it was studied as a book, which is really, we're going right back to the late antiquity when it was written about. It was already being written about in the 2nd century AD, and we can trace that reception history through to the present day, which the book does.
It does very well, and I love excuse me, everything about it, including the story of James Bruce and going into Cairo and all that. Very adventuresome, almost Indiana Jones, and of
Very
course
much.
we know he brought back the Book of You too, which is a very important Gnostic text. So there's that adventure. So we get to know his backstory and how he came. I mean, the book covers everything. But as you said, Tobias, you might have been one of the first ones in modernity to really find interest, because it seems academia kind of ignored it, right? It's only been sort of recently that it's become important as an apocryphal text, right? Why do you think suddenly it's very important in the occult community, the magical Thelema, Enoch is one of the big rock stars, but the academia sort of ignored it.
I think because it was, even when the very first, even though Bruce brought it back in 1772, it gets to Egypt back from Ethiopia with a copy. It wasn't published in English till 1821. That's the first English translation, for all sorts of reasons. One was Bruce was a bit of a dog in the manger with it. The other problem was they couldn't find people who could translate it effectively. And then there was a kind of lack of interest because of the nature of the times. Napoleonic wars were going on. There were many, many other political and academic distractions at the time. And on the title page of the first English translation, Archbishop Lawrence, who translated it, is keen to say that it's an apocryphal work. Now, that label, apocryphal, is like the kiss of death in terms of work's authority. So while you're apocryphal, historically has two meanings. One was the original meaning, apocryphon, which you have the Apocryphon of John, means a secret book. And usually secret because the line of transmission behind it is vague or obscure in some way. The other apocryphal meaning is that you have a book whose authorship is so uncertain that it has no authority within the church as a religious text. And the Book of Enoch, as it came to be called, suffered from that association. It was condemned by some theologians, but by no means all in the early church. The unique thing about the Book of Enoch in terms of the history of the church is this is the only text, the only prophecy quoted in the entire Bible, Old Testament and Christian Testament. It's the only prophecy quoted that is not actually in the Bible. That is unique. It appears in the Epistle of Jude or Judas, who could well have been Jesus's brother, which is a lonely little element of the New Testament. I say that because it's very different a text. The nearest thing is the Epistle of James, who also could have been Jesus' brother.
Right.
Now, this is primitive early Christianity, and it's perfectly obvious that in the first generation of the Jesus movement, the Book of Enoch was important and an authoritative prophecy of what was going to happen, and that Jesus had a part in this. That's terribly important. But all of that is suppressed by the 19th century because the name of Enoch has been associated not only with occultism, but especially with apocryphal or dangerous works. So it's a muted introduction, and it takes you going right through the 19th century as more and more people start to take an interest in it. But the breakthrough doesn't happen until the Dead Sea Scrolls, which people will know first appear on the market in Palestine in 1946. And then there's more excavations in 47 and more excavations in the 50s. In the process of excavating Qumran, Khirbet Qumran, the ruins of Qumran, that's what it means, by the northwest Dead Sea near En Gedi, they found no less than 7 fragmentary versions of the key parts of the Book of Enoch, the first Book of Enoch. That changes it entirely because it had been dated as a late first century work, in other words, post crucifixion. Once you've got the Aramaic version, we now know for an absolute certainty that this book was part of Middle Judaism, Second Temple Judaism, and was obviously venerated at some point by whoever put these collections of manuscripts together. That changes the picture. It was clearly regarded as an authoritative religious text by some Jews. Who those Jews were will go on being debated. Probably the largest number of scholars will tell you that there was some form of Essene community at Qumran. We probably haven't got time to go into that because it's a big question. I personally, I'm not convinced of that, nor am I convinced that this was a product necessarily of a group of Essenes. But that's by the by. The point is that it was clearly an important text. Now, whether you then say it was a sectarian Jewish text, well, you can might as well say that every school of Judaism is a sect, because Josephus calls Judaism a collection of sects. He says there are Pharisees, there are Sadducees, there are Essenes, and there are the people we know better as the Zealots, which are in favor of an armed rebellion. Now, whether Josephus was accurately reporting everything is there are all sorts of questions about that. But anyway, we now, since the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have a text that is finding a completely new sense of authority. And whereas in the 1970s, scholars really weren't very interested in, very few scholars took any interest in it. Now, thanks partly to Professor Gabriele Boccaccini of University of Michigan, who's organized a thing called the Enoch Seminar, and we meet every year. I've been lucky enough to participate in one of their publications and one of the seminars, and also an online seminar, which is a great fun to participate in, which has the best scholars in the world, including Hebrew experts, as you'd expect, and so forth. And it's still, you know, this isn't dead work that I'm trying to bring to life. This is very much an ongoing thing, and I think this book itself will be hopefully part of that growth of interest, because I think its significance to everything you stand for, as well as to the Christian religion and its origins, is quite astonishing.
Yes, it is indeed essential, as you write. It was. It's almost like Enoch is in the backdrop of the Christian, and Gnostic, and Jewish worldview. Is probably essential. I mean, I think we could say Jesus, his worldview was informed by Enoch. When Paul's talking about women covering your faces, he's not saying be humble. He's saying there are angels flying around, and if you don't cover your face, they will seduce you. I mean, it was really all over the place. I mean, I think we can say, and as you say, there are certain concepts, the Son of Man, and so forth, and Paul's idea of the God of this world, all that really comes from Enoch. And the Gnostics, of course, as I say, would dial it up to 11 when they were doing their theology, right? It's a
I think,
huge book.
I mean, one of the things that, one of the great mysteries of Gnostic studies is, I remember talking to Hans Jonas about this directly, was who, and Gilles Quispel had his take, which was very different to Jonas's. Jonas could not believe that a Jew could ever imagine that there were evil angels running the world, and that the creation of the world could possibly be attributed to any other but the supreme Jahwe.
Mhm.
And whereas Gilles Quispel, when I spoke to him in Bilthoven in Holland back in '86, he said who else was really interested in who created the world, and who could take a critical view of the Septuagint. And that question's still open, in my opinion, but there is no doubt at all in my mind that the very notion of there being evil angels corrupting the world, this is from the Book of Enoch. This idea, this is a fundamental thing. You then, obviously, in the most radical Gnosticism, Apocryphon of John, you then go the next stage, and they've not only corrupted the world, but they've effectively created it. Now, that obviously is a very, very big step, a very, very big step to take. But you can actually see the logic of how that you could arrive at that, especially
Yeah.
once you have Jesus's distinction of Satan as the prince of this world, and prince means in Greek is archon, which is the same word you find in the book of Daniel for the being who is like a son of man, who visits Daniel, then goes off to meet the archons behind Persia and the archon behind Greece. In other words, you have already the notion in Judaism in the 2nd century BC that the Gentiles were governed by evil angels, which they worshipped as their gods. And that is how they distinguish themselves from the true God worshipped by the people of Israel. And so all of that business about speculation on the relative power of angels and their impact on earth, this is massively encouraged by the speculations of the Book of Enoch, and which provide a complete rationale. I mean, Professor Boccaccini has even gone so far as to say that the Enochic, that there is a thing called Enochic Judaism. There's actually effectively a kind of brand, an important brand, perhaps a reactionary brand coming from the 2nd century BCE, that's Enochic in its theology, whereby evil comes into the world. This is a very important point, not as a result of human failing, not as a result of Eve and Adam's disobedience, not as a result of Cain's slugging Abel, but is brought to earth by Azazel or Semiyaza, because there are 2 leaders of angels in the first book of Enoch, and that this evil has corrupted the world. There's a line in First Enoch where it says, "To him, Azazel, ascribe all sin." Now, what this means is that evil has a spiritual source and cannot be defeated by human effort. There is the need for a redeemer. There has to be something from heaven has got to come out and sort this out. Now, this is the basic motive of all apocalyptic religion, which is the Christianity of a great deal of people around the world, and certainly in the United States. That basically Christianity really is about ending this world and replacing it with a new one, where the pure and the righteous will be saved, and the wicked will receive eternal punishment.
Oh, very well said. Yeah, I would disagree with Hans Jonas. I think, again, A, Enoch was pervasive. B, I don't see a problem with the Gnostic thought coming out of Judaism. Enoch's one idea. April DeConnick, in her new book, talks about how in the 1st century there was this Ophite Judaism where Jews were reinterpreting the Garden of Eden and saying that maybe the snake was a good guy. And the other one too, I did a presentation recently, Tobias, on Noria, and you write about her in your book, Gnostic Mysteries of Sex. And we both know that Noria is based on Nema, the Canaanite wife of Tubal-Cain, who, and before Christianity, becomes this demigoddess that goes around, and what does she do? She seduces the Watchers and the Nephilim, and this is found in Jewish apocryphal stories. They were holy back then, and then the Gnostics simply rebranded her as, Noria, Sophia, and Prunicus. So again, a huge idea of the Nephilim concrete, even beyond the Book of Enoch. It was in the air, Tobias, and as I say, it was probably the worldview of Jews and early Christians back then. You can't escape it.
Mm, mm. It does rather muddy the waters for those looking for a kind of Sunday Christianity, rational and comprehensible, deliverable from the pulpit by representatives of the Episcopal Church or the Baptist churches or what have you. It does muddy their waters somewhat, and so you can imagine that this interest in the books of Enoch will be resisted naturally. We had the Archbishop of Canterbury, I can't remember how many archbishops ago, because they seem to be falling like flies at the moment in England, referring to Gnosticism. When the Gospel of Judas was published, he said, we have no truck with these exotic forms of religion. And I thought, well, and you don't think Christianity in its orthodox presentation is exotic? If you'd never heard it before, wouldn't you find the notion a little exotic? He came down from earth to heaven, as the Christmas carol has it. All of that is a bit exotic, isn't it? It's all what they mean is highly unfamiliar ways of looking at it. And of course, there has been right through history a process of rationalization of religious tradition in the Orthodox churches, and a removal of difficult elements. And the first book of Enoch is one of those difficult elements that by the 6th century AD had become removed from the church, and it disappears from the Western world. Part of its fascination is that it was a lost book in its entirety. It disappears from the Western Europe for between we're talking about before Muhammad. We're talking about the 6th century. It's only known in quotations, right through to 1772, and in fact in English until 1821. This is a long vacation for a book that clearly inspired the original Nazarim, as we must call the original Nazareans, and it was for them an inspiration. Do you remember that thing in Mark's Gospel where Jesus takes his disciples to Dan, then called Caesarea Philippi, also Panias? It's near Dan. It's on the foothills of Mount Hermon, on what is now the Lebanese border. And he takes them there, and he says to Peter, "Who do men say that I am?" And I think it's Peter replies, one of the disciples replies, "Some say you are Elijah, some say John the Baptist returned," I think was one of them, and some say another. Another. I always had the feeling that in that another was, is Enoch coming back here? Because the position that Jesus takes up has, without doubt, I don't need to argue the point. Read the first book of Enoch, and you cannot but can come to the conclusion that Enoch is a kind of proto-Christ figure.
For sure, the name means initiate and so forth. Truly mystical. But I guess the other question. Oh, sorry. Let me backtrack. As you astutely show, even in the Epistle of Peter, and I don't have it written down, there's one passage where whoever wrote Peter, he's talking about angels being thrown in the underground, and us with our, Sunday school glasses. Oh, he's talking about Satan, but it's a direct parallel from Enoch, isn't it, Tobias?
Yes, I think it's in the Creed that Jesus goes down to. He descended into hell, and on the 3rd day he rose again. Why does he descend into hell? He descends into hell to presumably have some sort of relationship with the beings that are held in hell. And those beings that were held in hell is effectively created to dispose of the spirits of the giants.
Right.
And although it would appear from Second Enoch that the rebel angels are incarcerated in one of the levels of heaven. But the spirits of the giants, because while the giants, thousands and thousands of foot bodies, the Nephilim, while they were destroyed in the flood, as far as you can tell from the way the traditions are sewn up, because they came from heaven through their parentage, of course they're immortal, which is why we have the image. People will often ask the question, why should sinners be burned in hell forever? How sadistic. This is the Catholic Church has been frightening people for centuries with the idea, if you don't do that, you'll burn in hell forever. But what do you mean burn in hell? What kind of God burns people in hell? Can you imagine such a thing, an eternal flame? You wouldn't wish, unless you're of a certain kind, you wouldn't wish that on your worst enemy. You might want them dead, as it were, but you would eternally burn them. Now, the reason this eternal burning comes in is straight out of the Enochic tradition, because you cannot absolutely destroy the Nephilim because of their immortal parentage through the rebel angels. The only way you can hold them is in a kind of perpetuity. So they have to be held in this fire forever. That's the only way they can ever be held back, because you can't actually, God cannot destroy what cannot be destroyed. Immortality is immortality. So however bad they may be, they can only be held. And of course, what then happens as the apocalyptic tradition gathers moss as it tumbles, ordinary sinners are thrown in. Ordinary sinners are thrown in with them. So your average unrighteous person, or the rich, or the greedy rich, or the corrupt leaders, they're thrown in to an eternal flame as well. And that becomes established Christian doctrine, that sinners will be in. But that's the origin of it, and that's the reason. So it doesn't originate with some kind of colossal cosmic sadism. It's simply an appropriation of an Enochic trope. I don't like the word, but a myth.
It works. It definitely works. At the same time, on the other hand, as you've established in your book, and we're talking right now, Enoch and that Gnostic worldview, that apocalyptic Jewish worldview was essential. Jesus, Paul, Peter, everybody had it pretty much within certain sects. But why do you think Enoch got shunted away by both rabbinic Judaism and Christianity? As you write, Tobias, Tertullian thought it should be canon. Augustine didn't like it because he thought the idea of angels being corrupted was ridiculous, turncoat Manichaean. But why was it? Is it as simple as it kind of made the CEO of the universe look bad, that his management was just running awry and just causing havoc? Or and we had to make, the Jews and the Christians had to make God like almost perfect and have just one little bad guy, Satan, over here causing trouble? Or why do you think Enoch got forgotten?
Well, I think it was it fell into disuse in a kind of strange interrelationship between rabbinic Judaism, which replaces Mishnaic Judaism, which replaces the old temple system destroyed in AD 70, and the Jews of that school, of the rabbinic schools, not all by any means. There are also rabbis who were aware of the books of Enoch, and it's mentioned in the Zohar, of course, and becomes part of the Kabbalah tradition. Gershom Scholem says, in fact, that as far as he's concerned, the book of Enoch is the first Jewish mystical text, which makes it with the mother book of Kabbalah. Now that's an amazing statement.
Yeah.
Scholem says in his first book, Major Trends in Major Trends in Judaism? There's a qualifying adjective, I forget. So I think the rabbi tradition, especially if they were related to the Sadducean party, the Sadducees who disappear as a class of priests with the destruction of the Herodian world in the 1st century. I mean, there was an apocalypse. The apocalypse was the total destruction of Herodian Judaistic system is gone. And if Jesus prophesied that would happen, then it was a true prophecy. The rabbinic party seemed to be party to the view that doesn't like the tradition, the Enochic tradition that has developed. Now that will have all kinds of resonances for things that have happened for the previous 200 years. The other reason that the rabbinic tradition is against the Book of Enoch, apart from rational arguments about how could a book from that period even survive, but well, how did a book from Moses, etc. The Pentateuch was also attributed to Moses. I mean, that's not a very rational statement for anyone who's into philology, but they recognized it was used by Christians as a proof text for Jesus being the Messiah. So they don't like it for that reason. The other reason the rabbinic tradition doesn't like it is because it is strongly associated with apocalyptic excitement. And of course, that is what, as Josephus said, is what led to the destruction of the temple system and the catastrophe for the Jewish people, culminating in after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, when the Jews are kicked out of Jerusalem altogether and the temple site is leveled. So that's the absolute. So they would have. Now, you then got certain people in the early church who love the Book of Enoch. Tertullian's argument, Tertullian is one of the most hard-nosed, certainly anti-heretical, one of the church fathers. He's writing in about 200 AD. He says, look, if it's in St. Jude, then God likes it. That's it. We don't argue with that. That's there. Also, it has been held within the church as a sacred text. So we can't argue with that. And if you say, well, the book couldn't have survived the flood, which was one of the arguments used against it, because if it's a supposed antiquity, you say, well, first of all, Noah could have memorized it, or perhaps they sneaked one aboard with all the animals. I mean, they obviously had room for them. They must have had room for a text as well. So you have a rational. Now then you've got somebody like Origen writing 50 years later approximately, and he's sort of saying, well, if I may quote from the Book of Enoch, but bear in mind that some churches don't accept its authority. It's starting to move into a slightly different area. Instead of being an authoritative prophecy, it's a book that some churches respect and some don't. By the time of Augustine, as you rightly said, I hope you got that from my book.
I did indeed.
Augustine, his argument against it, or his claimed argument, I mean, it may not be the real reason why he rejected it, but his claimed reason is he couldn't possibly accommodate the notion that a heavenly being could become tempted and have sex with a human woman and produce these giants. To him, that was just a heretical notion. Spirit is spirit and flesh is flesh, and that may come from him having been a Manichaean hearer before his conversion.
Right.
For him, an incarnation of God produces Jesus, not a rebel angel. It doesn't produce something perverse. It produces something unspeakably magnificent, the figure of Jesus as Christ, as the Messiah. So anything that comes down from heaven to earth for him becomes heavenly. So for him, the theology of the Book of Enoch just goes against the very reason he converted from Manichaeism, namely was when he heard about the incarnation, God becoming man. He said, that I didn't hear anywhere else. That's new, and that was the key thing for Augustine. But of course, not everybody followed Augustine, and you have Syriac members of the Syriac Church who carry on venerating the Book of Enoch, and who say that the condemnation of it was due to a period in history where they were they went over the top condemning heretical books, and it was wrongly thrown amongst them. But that's also interesting because it suggests that the Book of Enoch somehow it's the post 367 AD festal letter of Athanasius. It's part of the clear out of the Egyptian church of heretical books, and it gets thrown in with them. And that's the impression one gets.
Yeah, very interesting.
Was that clear?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was clear. Graham, do you have a question? Was that clear to you? I've read the
Yeah.
book, so I got it all.
No, it was clear to me. I was going to sit here and just to double check my understanding is Tobias seems to be saying that the Book of Enoch is a product of a previous like era of Judaism before like the Herodian era of the fall of the temple, kind of almost predating the Hasmoneans and Maccabees, and it seems like it's connected. What's that?
Sorry. No. Well, we think that the two earliest sections of the first Enoch, which is the astronomical book and the Book of the Watchers, probably predate Judas Maccabeus, which is the one.
Okay. That's tracking with me. It seems to be tied in.
Not by many decades.
Also seems to be tied into the whole Merkaba era of the Jewish mysticism as well.
Well, no, we can attribute Merkava mysticism to the Enochic tradition, because in Second Enoch you have the ascent through the 10 heavens, and that's
So
really the origin.
It's the first of the Merkaba tradition. Nice,
Well,
thank you.
That was Gershom Scholem's view.
No, makes sense. Now, it's also important, I think, for people to keep in mind that the Jewish canon wasn't finalized until like the 5th or 6th century AD, well after the Christian canon was. So
this is, and of course, the Christian canon isn't formulated definitively until the 4th and 5th centuries.
Exactly.
And there was dispute then over some books. Shepherd of Hermas was in with some people, it was out. Second Peter had a bit of a rough ride. The Book of Revelation wasn't universally accepted either.
Right.
And in earlier times, the Gospel of John was also a suspect text. So yes, the old argument of Lawrence that the Book of Enoch was apocryphal and therefore should be regarded as a curiosity rather than as theologically significant. That doesn't stand ground at all. And your modern up-to-date scholar these days does not accept canonicity as a category of seriousness. It's simply because it didn't make the final canon doesn't mean that it was not an instrumental text in the formulation of religion.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Tobias.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Yes, a small crowd. Again, this is a special stream for members. Small crowd. I see HP Lovecraft there. If you have any questions, but you just mentioned the 10 heavens and going again to Gnostic thought. You write in your book that the 10 heavens perhaps influence the Bogomils and the Cathars cosmology.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't even know about Second Enoch, as it's called, were it not for the tradition of the Slavic Orthodox churches, but also the non-Orthodox churches. It was important. I mean, if you look at the Les Questions de Jean, the Cathar text, which is from a Bogomil source, you can see the influence of Second Enoch. And that's how the manuscript was discovered. It was discovered in the Eastern churches in the 19th century, and it's usually dated around early 1st century. So you're talking about when sort of Jesus was a teenager, young man. That's when you're getting Second Book of Enoch, and in the Second Book of Enoch, Enoch actually becomes more than human. He's identified with the figure of the Son of Man.
Very cool. And for the audience, we were talking about Gnosticism obviously is a perfect continuation or part of the stream, this Egyptian Jewish mystic apocalyptical stream. And in the secret book of John, Not only do you have, the archons and the story of Eden, all that, but there's actually a rewriting of the book of Enoch. But instead, Yaldabaoth sends the archons to mate with the women, but in this one, in some of the version, the women are smart. Actually, the Gnostics make the women smart. They're like, I see through your illusion. I'm not falling for it. So they're better. I always think in the Secret Book of John, Tobias, Yaldabaoth is like the coyote trying to get the road runner when it came to the humans. Like, I'll create fate, I'll create death, I'll create the counterfeit spirit, I'll send my archons to mate with women. And he's always, he fails a lot, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, the name for him, Saklas in Coptic, the fool.
Yeah.
The thing is, the false god is the folly, and to my mind, of course, represents the ego of the universe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our ego when we're disconnected.
And of course, and the very thing that makes human beings at their worst is overbearing, making too many claims. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Yaldabaoth is your haughty spirit. He's your proud, your proud boy.
Very much. Yeah, and it is sad today because, as I often mention, remember there was a time not too long ago in classical times that every politician or societal leader would talk about wisdom and being wise. You never hear about that anymore. Nobody talks about being wise, about having Sophia, right, Tobias?
I think that's very similar thoughts have been crossing my mind lately. The difference between cleverness and wisdom.
Mhm.
People who talk about being smart is not the same as people aspiring to be wise. And a wise person doesn't go around saying, "Hey, I'm wise." Cleverness is usually a mixture of egoism plus cunning, and we are in the entire ethical spiritual tradition. It's something we're warned repeatedly against falling for this pretense of wisdom.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I
Do you
think we
remember?
need.
Do you remember when Nixon was given his blessing by Billy Graham?
Yeah,
And
I
he
do
swears
briefly.
on the Bible. I remember the little scene where Nixon, I think it's his first term, and Billy Graham in his full sort of sweaty prophetic mode, and he says, "And may the Lord grant our president supernatural wisdom." I remember that's the exact. Always struck me, and I thought, my God, if he could put that into Nixon, wow! But I don't think he could. But he prayed for it. He had the right. He probably had the right idea. It would have been wonderful to have had a president with supernatural wisdom. There's
Yeah.
no doubt of it. Rather than people who think they have supernatural wisdom.
Yeah, and as you're right, even the book of Enoch has a warning. What happens? Wisdom comes down and men reject her, and she has to go back into the cloud.
Yeah, yeah,
So men
yeah,
reject Sophia.
yeah. And this is the other. I mean, it's proverbial wisdom, literally, of the book of Proverbs. Put not your faith in princes. Beware of authority figures, authoritarianism. It is, of course, what happens when people are frightened. When they're frightened, they want Big Chief to turn up and say, "I'll sort it out." And they pay one hell of a price for it. Do you ever see John Lennon's wonderful little sketch of the demiurge?
No.
Oh, it's in Skywriting by word of mouth. It wasn't published till after his death.
Right. There's that part where he talks about the only true Christians are the Gnostics. I
Oh, the
remember that.
Gnostics. That's right. But he did a little one of his cartoons of the demiurge. He was very aware. Like you were talking about David Bowie before we were on air,
Mhm.
and Lennon had also cottoned on to the idea of the demiurge, of the false god who gets on the podium and promises the promised land, the golden age. All your problems will be solved. Follow me. This is messianism. This is, interestingly enough, this is exactly what the rabbis were worried about. That there would be yet, oh God, they didn't want to encourage messianism because every time messianism really got in the imagination of the Jewish people, disaster would erupt soon afterwards. And the rabbinic tradition was an intense spiritualization of the people of Jewry, as they used to use that phrase, in their daily life, rather than projecting it into the political world. And I mean, this is a pretty necessary survival mechanism for Judaism to survive the catastrophe of the first century.
Yeah, and people forget that Orwell had many warnings, but one of his warnings that there's always a high chance that when there's a revolution, he who leads the revolution will become the next tyrant.
Oh yeah, no question, no question.
So
Yeah, this is just something that happens to human beings. Given you know, rampant ego, it corrupts the soul, and but it takes on the appearance of you know, of a genuine conviction.
mhm.
You know, wolves in sheep's clothing, all that. You know, but yeah, democracy. With a
Yeah,
quiver democracy. You know, all the tyrants are voted in, aren't they? You know, they're
yeah,
voted.
yeah. Well, that's what Churchill once said. It's probably apocryphal, but he says, "I hate democracy, but all the other systems are worse."
Yes, it's absolutely. This is. He said, yeah, it's our best defense against tyranny is democracy. Was what he said. But that doesn't mean that it cannot also. He was perfectly well aware. Lord Hailsham in England, 4 decades ago, talked about elected dictatorship.
Mhm.
But that's what democracy produces, and it all depends on how popular the dictator is, I suppose.
Yeah, as Black Sabbath sang, "Mob rules."
Mm.
You can get 51% of the population, and suddenly you're a heretic. Suddenly you're going to jail, Tobias, right?
It's. I just remember, you know, I was thinking. Um, Yeah, I remember. I think it was a conversation I had with Hans Jonas, when he was saying, "Well, you know, why didn't the Gnostics succeed? Why didn't they?
Yeah.
You know, Valentinus nearly became Bishop of Rome in about 160. Why did the Gnostic movement get control of ideology and theology in the church in the end?" And his view was that when it came down to it, the concerns of the Gnostic tradition are not worldly, you know, and this is why he said it will always be a minority interest for those who've, to use the Gospel of Philip's phrase, they come crucifying the world. If you do not put your treasure in this world, you put your treasure in heaven, then what is going, you know, again, you've got Gospel of Thomas, become passers-by. Now, you're never going to have a powerful church based on people who fundamentally renounced the world. This is something that there's a whole class of people, children of the giants, shall we say, who, for whom world domination is everything. World domination is everything. For the church, for the Christian church, world domination becomes the aim. In other words, the Jesus, the Messiah, will not come again until the world has all heard the Christian message. And how far do you then take it? Well, not only heard but actually accepted it, which means it's dominated. In that, which it then becomes, of course, self-fulfilling prophecy, because if everyone was convinced of the apocalyptic Christian message, Jesus the Messiah, then I suppose you could say Jesus is the Messiah, because no one else is going to say otherwise. But yeah, yeah, this is it. I think the Gnostic tradition is to do with a renunciation of what it regards as a false vision of things, and you have that strongly in the Book of Enoch too, because it is understood that the real conditions of this, like the oppression of the poor, the persecution of the wise, the lying, the cheating, the wife beating, all of that goes on, the persecution in this world, and this world is what's going to end, and with it all of that persecution. So what would be the point of investing in the world as it is? And that's always been the challenge. You have it carried on in the monasteries, this feeling that you can be in the world but not of it.
Yeah, as the
And
Sufi
it's why what we read and write about will never become, I don't think, popular. If it did, I'd be concerned that it had become seriously diluted.
Yeah, well, yeah, it does. As you said, the secret book of John says that to this day, the people have Nephilim blood and the counterfeit spirit. It's tough out there. I guess the only exception is the Manichaeans were pretty successful, Tobias. So why do you think the classical Gnostics can do it? But it seems the Manichaeans had a very global religion and very Gnostic religion.
I think
Obviously, they got killed
no,
in the end.
they did eventually were wiped out in China and Turkestan and so on, and they were wiped out by Mongol hordes. And
But their message resonated with the people.
well, yes, and so is the Gnostic message. But yes, you've got a point. Perhaps one's being too negative. I don't see why you can't have a Gnostic church, of course. I mean, or sets or any number of Gnostic kind of communities. But they'll always be up against the contramundum. They'll always be up against the world. And so long as the world is as it is, there is a choice, a dichotomy, and an opposition. But yes, how much faith can we put? It's very difficult. It's very difficult. What do you tell a child? What do you teach? What do we teach our children? Do you say to them, age whatever, 7, 10, 14? Well, don't get too excited about being in this world. It will prove eventually very disappointing. Or you teach them the Buddhist so-called first noble truth. Everything is sorrow. Or the general suspicion of the whole Eastern civilization, all human life is ultimately futile. We have that in the book of Ecclesiastes, in the Bible, Kohelet, the preacher. Everything is all is vanity and a striving after wind. What do we teach our children? Well, in a Christian culture, you say, well, you do your best in this world, you practice virtue, but your greater hope should be for a world beyond this one. Mm-hmm. Is that an unreasonable position, do you think?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, we are going to spend most of eternity somewhere else. The Gnostics they were based on Egyptian lore, right? What are the Egyptians? Yeah, we're in this world, but most of the time, 99%, we're going to spend our time everywhere else. So let's embrace eternity. Let's see the whole picture.
Yes, and we can. And art is the good art. What I'd say good art is art which spreads light rather than gloom. Art is telling us that we can bring eternity into this world. Mm-hmm. Love is telling us that as well. Right. The love of a loving parent, first of all, and then the love that we have for each other as brothers and sisters. All of this is bringing eternity into the world. And we should get back to the books of Enoch before we get too sentimental.
Yeah, exactly.
Tracks,
Join Patreon, AB Prime, or Red Circle and get the full episode and podcast summary and other cool bonuses. Clean episodes on a private RSS feed, exclusive streams, early shows, and no more commercials. Support Eon Byte.